what would happen is you would go and you say, hey, oh, I work at Apple, and you would just get like, ooh, like you get these kind of reactions.
You know, you write code, you actually push your changes, and those changes go out to billions of people.
I swear, I think they're gonna fire me. I can't believe I did this. This is a big mistake. You're crazy to leave this job. This is everybody would kill to have this job. What are you talking about? You want to leave? What I realized is the money doesn't really matter. The status at some point wears off, and you're really looking at yourself and am I happy with what I'm doing? Yes or no?
What does it take to reach the pinnacle of career success? And what do you do when you get there and realize that your heart may not be in the right place? My name is John Namchi, and welcome to Simvo's first ever beautiful interview. Today, I sit down with my longtime and highly respected friend, Ali Shobeiri. Having moved from Iran to Calgary when he was 7, he rose to attend one of Canada's top universities. After graduating, he joined Microsoft as an engineer, and if that wasn't enough, shortly after, he moved to San Francisco to join Apple at their headquarters in Cupertino. Truly a fever dream for any 24-year-old. Yet, somewhere along the way, he was able to break free from his golden handcuffs and take on the daunting task of becoming a startup entrepreneur. How did he do it, and what did he learn along this journey? Let's watch to find out. All right, so hey Ali, thanks for coming out. Really appreciate you.
Of course, yeah.
I feel like this beautiful scenery location that we're in.
Very nice, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful.
Absolutely. So why don't we start from the very beginning? You know, I'd like to know, you moved from Iran to Calgary when you were 7. Do you remember much about that journey, kind of migrating into Canada in the first place?
I remember parts of Iran. It's so long ago now that I remember parts of it, but it's not like a big part of my memories anymore, to be honest. But I remember parts of it. I remember having more family around than when we moved to Canada. I remember Canada being super cold. I remember these kind of pieces, but
it is freezing, especially in Calgary too, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you kind of moved to Calgary, were you guys like in an isolated community, or were there other kind of community members?
Family-wise, we didn't. Well, we had some family there. Like my mom's cousins were there, and they were super helpful getting us set up, which was awesome. Like it was great to have a family like that. But otherwise, it wasn't like too much family.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You kind of make do. It was cool because like family friends end up becoming family almost. Like become very close to you. So it was good. It was a nice place to grow up. I like Calgary a lot. Still like it a lot. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being here in San Francisco is kind of hard to go back there during the winter time.
Yeah, winter time is tough to go back. But Canada in the summer, dude, is unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so kind of growing up in maybe not the biggest community, but having that kind of support system. Do you think that kind of helps you? Become a good student and eventually get into McGill University, by the time you're a later teen.
I'm laughing because I wasn't a good student, actually. What happened for me is I was a good student up until like junior high school, and then I stopped caring about school.
Oh.
And then I remember grade 12 in Canadian schools, like grade 12 is when it really matters because that's what matters for going to university. And I remember thinking at that time my average was around 80%, so like it's okay, but it's not good enough to go to like top Canadian school. And at that time I was thinking, oh wow, like this is the deciding point. And I had a kid in my class who said that he was applying to McGill, which we went to get together, but he said he was applying to McGill, and I was like, fuck, if this kid's thinking of applying, like why the fuck why the fuck am I not thinking of it? And so anyways, after that I started studying a little bit, and I remember actually the exact moment when I was like, oh, I need to take school seriously, is I had a chemistry quiz, and then I went to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And as I was in the bathroom before the chemistry quiz, I was like, holy fuck, if I fuck this quiz up, like...
That's it.
This is it. I might not go to university, my life changes. I remember I came back with so much intensity. Then I was like so focused on getting back to my desk, and my knee got under another girl's desk, and I almost flipped her desk over. I was like literally just power walking back to my desk.
Oh my goodness.
So anyways, I wasn't really a good student until that point, where I was like, oh, I need to get serious about this, and then I started studying, and then I was able to get good enough grades to go. But
Okay.
if you ask my mom, I was never a good student. My mom was
She
always
wasn't
on
sure
me.
till like the very last second.
Oh, my mom was so worried because she was always, from her perspective too, is like she sacrificed a lot to come,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it bothered her that
Yeah,
I
we-
have this opportunity to do something and I wasn't doing anything with it, so she was stressed out.
Yeah.
But eventually it worked out. So
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love that. I think that really stresses the idea that sometimes you have these high pressure moments, or the moments where it matters, where a lot of the time you can practice and spend a lot of time kind of leading up to these important moments, but if you're able to perform in those important moments, that's actually when your life can really change. So what do you think about that idea of the important moments are really when your performance does matter?
I think it's true. I think it is definitely true. It's just basically every other moment you're preparing for the important moments too. So you learn from everything, but I do think you're right. There's like certain inflection points that if you can get right, you can do really well with them.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky in some cases to do well with them, in some cases having not done so well with them.
Yeah, no, of course, but that's great. I think it lends to the idea that, even if you're trying to progress towards like some kind of goal or something, and you may not feel like you're progressing that well or you're failing, it doesn't necessarily matter until you reach that important moment. So as long as you kind of prepare for those kinds of important times, I think you can be in a right spot and actually reach your goals. So why don't we move on to, so you finally got into McGill at that point and you joined engineering. And so I kind of want to know about your journey from, starting school and then joining Microsoft out of college. Was that like a straightforward journey, or how did you actually, finally get that first job, which so many students, in engineering especially, are coveting, when they're in university?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in high school I was kind of slacking off a lot. And then when I got to university, I remember I got to the residence, and in the first week you're talking to all these different people. I remember one kid was telling me, and I remember, I guess just high level, I remember feeling super out of place, because I was like, oh, these guys are like accomplished, they've done cool things, and all I did was play League of Legends at home all of high school, and then just studied right at the end and happened to sneak in. So like I felt kind of out of place. And then I remember one kid I was talking to, he was like, yeah, over the summer I went to Korea and I taught English to all these Korean kids and I made like $20,000. And some other guy was like, yeah, I started a nonprofit for homeless people. Just things like this.
Just devastating things to hear for yourself, right? Like,
Exactly.
oh, what am I doing with my time,
Well, and even I was spending it playing League, and I wasn't even any good at League. I wasn't even like, I was gold or something. I wasn't even like the highest.
Gold.
I wasn't even good.
Can't really say that in comparison to teaching in Korea, though.
So anyways, arriving there, it kind of raised the level for me, because I realized, oh, you need to work. Like, it's not you need to work, you need to do different things. So my mentality going in was like, try to do as many things as possible. And initially I wanted to like build the resume, so I was just doing stuff that I didn't really care about, which eventually kind of ended up being not the best thing to do. But anyway, so I started taking on a whole bunch of extracurricular activities, joining like different clubs, communities, and trying to be involved as much as I could. And so that was like my first couple of years. And then throughout the process, when you're talking about Microsoft and all these tech companies, I was kind of focused on going to the tech companies. And when I came to San Francisco with my family in 2015 summer, so I joined McGill in 2015, and I came here and I went and visited the Google campus with my family. And I was telling my dad, like, yeah, I'm gonna be here one day. Like, it just,
of course. I mean, your dad would love to hear that, that kind of determination from his son.
Yeah, so it was just like big talk like this. And so that was always my goal, is just to go do that. And so I was always applying, just making resumes all the time, applying, and doing the wrong things. Like, if I were doing this again, I would do it a different way. Like, I was just focused on building a resume and then applying. But now what I understand about software engineering, the right thing to do is build projects and then apply, instead of just building random resume credentials that don't mean much to these people. But in any case, so I kept applying, would have interviews almost every year for Microsoft, would fail them every year, and then eventually full-time was able to pass that and then
so
continue on.
I think you were saying that for 3 summers in a row you had applied to Microsoft and other big tech companies and didn't get into any of those for those 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And in the final year, when it actually mattered, at least for a long-term job, then you actually got the job in that case, Do you think that persistence of applying and keep on, pushing on to something really helped you there?
Oh yeah, and it definitely did help me for sure. But I was laughing because I was struggling so hard to find jobs that one time I sent a recruiter an email almost begging her. And I remember, dude, I was so emotional about finding a job that I was writing this email and I was almost begging her, like, please give me a chance, like please.
Some
And
poetic...
I was crying when I was writing this because I tied so much of my self-worth to jobs that I'm not exaggerating. I literally was crying, writing an email to a recruiter, just being like, please, like, give me an opportunity, please. She said no.
Oh, no. Okay. So maybe begging might not be the ideal strategy, eh?
But yeah, so... No, I mean, it's all persistence, I think, is a big part of it, just being able to make it into these tech companies. There's a lot of roles in these big tech companies, so just showing up and keeping honing your skills, you'll eventually get in if you want to.
Yeah. No, and I think that really lends credence to the fact that, you know, these people who are part of these amazing companies oftentimes they're not that different from the average person beyond, you know, the kind of extra work that they put in, the commitment to the process and, you know, applying or finding projects to do and just taking kind of like an active role in building up your profile, you know. I think that's what separates those who kind of get in versus those who don't, versus an actual like, you know, talent or, you know, better genetics or something like that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think,
Yeah, exactly, you know. Sorry, I was going to say, you know, what you also said about the self-worth and tying to jobs. I think that's a great segue into talking about, so you finally got into Microsoft, you know, so in some ways it was like all of your work finally, you know, was made, you got validation from that. Do you find that you had a greater feeling of self-worth when you finally first joined Microsoft?
No, not really. No, honestly, not really. What happened actually was I was chasing definitely the status. I wanted to be able to say that, hey, I was able to achieve it, and I didn't, like, just among friends or peers, I wanted to say, hey, I achieved going to a big tech company. And even when I was at Microsoft, I was like, oh, I need to go somewhere bigger. Like, I need a bigger name. Like, I need to be in the FANG. Anyways, so I had this kind of mindset around status. So I almost didn't feel great about myself even at Microsoft. I was like, oh, I need something better. Like, I need something higher.
Yeah. Interesting. And
so, yeah.
Because I remember you were telling me that, you know, when you first joined, you kind of realized actually really quickly that you may not have liked the position that you ended up in. You know, how did you realize that? What were the things that made you, think that?
So before I joined Microsoft, I had this internship at Unity, and I really liked the team, I liked the work, I liked everything I was doing. But then I think part of it, and I ended up leaving to join Microsoft, so I had an opportunity to stay at Unity, do work that I was interested in, maybe make less money, but
it's good work versus, you know, kind of high status job.
Exactly, yeah. And so I ended up taking Microsoft, and then I spent 10 months doing a little bit of front end, but a lot of PowerShell scripting.
Oh, which doesn't sound nice at all. Yeah.
Which is kind of like when I was like, why did I make this decision? Like, so anyways, it was a good lesson just to make decisions based on your own feeling. And I say it was a good lesson as if I learned it at that point. I definitely didn't learn it at that point, but it's a theme I've started to notice. That
exactly.
You got to
the
follow
gears started to turn, and you kind of started to realize that, you know, on top of just status or whatever kind of dream job that is conventionally, you know, advertised, I think looking towards the quality of the people that you're working with and how satisfying the work is. Often you realize that's a lot more important than what you thought was important, like status and so on. You know?
Right.
So, and what I like what you did was, you know, you kind of realized that, and within 10 months you were able to make your move out of Microsoft and join Apple at headquarters at the spaceship, you know, campus down in Cupertino. So how are you able to kind of make that jump, and what kind of triggered you to say, I'm just going to do this?
Yeah, I wish I could give advice that would be transferable, but I honestly got lucky because I had a friend. Some friends of mine knew that I wasn't very happy with my role and I wanted to find something else, but I had a friend who messaged me saying, hey, we have this opening on our team at Apple, would you be interested in interviewing? And I said, yeah. I didn't interview anywhere else. I was like, okay, I'm gonna just take this super seriously, prepare for the interviews as best I can, spend a lot of time doing it, preparing. I mean, got myself ready for the interviews and then interviewed and then got in. So for me, it was a bit of luck, and I think there's been a lot of that in my life where just happened to meet somebody or somebody's helping open the door some way. And so a lot of it has been for that for me, just relationships, nice people, good people generally helping me out. So I don't know. I don't know if it's transferable advice, but I think one of the things that I learned actually was at Microsoft when I decided to leave. A lot of people were telling me, "Oh, why would you leave? Like, you'll have to give back the signing bonus. You'll have to do this. You'll have to do that." And they were all telling me all these different things. And I realized in the end when I left, it wasn't actually a big deal. I gave back the signing bonus. Nobody cares. I didn't even put the role on my resume even.
Yeah,
it's just like, so now it literally doesn't matter to me at all. But at the time it was, people were telling me all these things.
Yeah, of course, I think you're crazy to leave such a job like
exactly
that.
So anyways,
no, I mean, I don't think that advice is non-transferable, because I think that really stresses the importance of having a strong network or building, close relationships with different people. I think at least for myself and a lot of people I know, a lot of the jobs that we got was from someone we know, or someone, getting us that in, especially these days where, jobs have like 100, 300 applications on LinkedIn. Like, I'm sure many of you guys see those ridiculous kind of jobs on LinkedIn, and there's so many people applying. The kind of way to kind of stand out is to get that in from somebody, right? Getting their recommendation from a trusted source. So what kind of attitude would you say you need to be able to develop a strong network? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, I need to meet all these people, I need to go out all the time, I need to, it's all tiring. But I think you can find a way to kind of grow your network without having those, without feeling inauthentic, right? So how would you say you kind of built that network and maybe made that friend who was at Apple?
I mean, I'll use an example of how you and I know each other. I guess the way I think about stuff always is, you should just be friends with everyone. Try to be friends with everyone. And then now I've realized I'm getting old enough where, like, oh, you can't be friends with everyone. There's people you're mismatched with. So
but you can be a good person. You can be a good person to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, be friendly with everyone. Say hello to everyone. And I think two cultures that actually helped me is, in Iranian culture, there's a lot of like hospitality, and so that helped me kind of develop this. But then also Canadian culture, everybody on the street says hello to each other. So you kind of,
really nice.
It kind of helped me develop that. But even when I was saying how you and I know each other, it's like I had a good friend. That good friend knew you, and then I became friends with you, and then eventually later in life we live in the same city, and we get to like connect even stronger, right? So it's a lot of that. Like you honestly. Just like, I remember getting in the elevator, even residence in university. Anybody that was in the elevator with me, I'd talk to them the whole way. Oh, what are you doing? What's life? And then you see that person again. And then you see them again. Eventually they become your friend. And then it's like, maybe whatever, you don't know, maybe 10 years down the line, you text them hey, we haven't rolled, do you want to join? And it happens like this. Like, I never think about it honestly as networking. It's just like trying to make friends with people. And when you make friends with people, sometimes things align, sometimes they don't.
I agree. I think it should, you should always try and build relationships naturally. And, when you're kind of meeting someone new, not necessarily have some kind of agenda of, I can predict maybe they'll help me in the future. I think having just a fundamental sense of, I can be a good person to you, you can be a good person to me, and, who knows what can happen in the future. I think taking that kind of approach not only makes things less tiring and less kind of stressful, and also just much more authentic, but it also gives you the power to kind of, make as many connections as you can, because at that point, you're not feeling like you're doing something you don't want to do, and, you're not feeling like you want to, you have some kind of agenda, so I really like that, so I think that's a great transition. So thanks to that, networking opportunity, you join Apple, in Cupertino. How did that feel? I guess, you were 24 years old, an offer obviously in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. How does that feel for someone who's so young to kind of, get into the throes of that? I'm laughing because of the way you framed it. Sorry, it's just making me think, there would be always on LinkedIn, people would like post that they just got an internship at like something. Like, I just got an internship at Apple, and they would write it as if they signed like a max term contract to like an NBA team. Those LinkedIn posts, of course.
And so it made me think of that. But no, I'll be honest with you, you earn a lot of money. And so what it was like is, honestly, my plan coming out of university was to always keep my spend really low, and I still kind of done the same thing. So you could ask my roommates. When we started even looking for furniture, I was like on Facebook Marketplace looking for free furniture, and then I drove everyone down to Daly City. We brought back a sectional that was like totally free. Anyway, so it wasn't like the money really affected me, because in my head I was like, don't spend money, save the money when you can, because you might need it.
Yeah.
I don't know where that mentality comes from, but it's just something that I had in my head. So the money didn't really affect me that much, and I didn't spend too much of it. But I think for me more it was the status, like the fact that it gave me a little bit of status, and I felt happy with that. And especially, for example, like going back to Calgary, because Calgary, a lot of people will stay typically in Calgary. Most of my friends stayed and whatever.
Yeah.
And what would happen is you would go and you say, hey, I work at Apple, and you would just get like, ooh, like you get these kind of reactions, and that initially it feels good. But then at some point, that kind of wears off, and it's more about the work, more about what you're doing day to day.
Yeah.
And if that isn't matching up to what you want, then it doesn't really matter if other people are as impressed.
No, of course. And can you share what you did at Apple specifically?
Yeah, so I worked on like people-based suggestions. So the easiest one is if you ever share a photo on iOS, you get a row of suggestions to share to, and then I controlled the ranking for that.
Okay.
So basically like the people that show up, like the bubbles that you can click.
Yeah.
And then also the apps that you can select. So I controlled the ranking for that. There was also some other ranking models throughout the system, but those were like the main ones that I put a lot of focus into.
And before we get into, if you actually enjoyed that work, one thing that's really interesting about being at Apple is, you write code, you actually push your changes, and those changes go out to billions of people. How does that feel when you're feeling like every kind of letter you type on the keyboard, is going to have such a big impact?
I'll tell you on the other story where I had a negative impact. So there was one time in this kind of share sheet is what it's called. There was an issue with battery percentage. So basically what happens is when you plug your phone in, your iPhone, and it's charged and say it's already reached 100%, after it reaches 100%, it's like, oh, okay, I have all this free energy, let me train some ML models. And so that's a lot of times you like pick up your phone and you'll see it's a little bit hot. It's because the CPU is running and like doing different tasks in the background. And like, anyway, so what happens is when you disconnect your phone, these training tasks stop running. So it's like all the models that were training, everything that was like high energy costs, they're meant to stop.
Yeah.
But in this one case, one of the things that we were running, one of these tasks that we were running, wasn't stopping when you disconnected your phone.
Okay.
And it was like draining people's batteries.
Is that why my battery always dies?
So it was draining people's batteries 30% in the wild, like 30% more than normal, right?
Yeah.
And so I get this bug, and they're about to release the next version of iOS. And I get this bug within like a few days of them releasing it, which is like super high priority. Typically they'll lock the release for like 2 weeks. So you can't put in a change 2 weeks before iOS releases. This is like a few days before. And it's like super important because battery life is 30%, is just huge.
Yeah.
So like you need to fix this now. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to fix it. I put in a fix, whatever. And then long story short, I actually introduced a crash.
Okay.
So like this fix that I created ended up crashing some process on everybody's phone. So basically once a day, everybody's phone would have this process that would crash. And then they have an Apple, they have like this internal dashboard where you can track crashes on devices. And then it would be like, just like a bar is like super small like this. And then it would be like this huge like bar, which was like the bug that I introduced that just crashed. Because it would crash literally on every single iPhone once a day.
Okay,
just once a day.
That's billions of crashes a day.
And dude, I remember when this happened, because they said, okay, is the battery thing fixed? I'm like, yeah, it's fixed, but I introduced this crash. They're like, we don't care. Like, as long as the battery's fixed, who cares? And so I was like, because it was so close to the release, they didn't want to risk something else.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, all right. But I was so worried that I was going to get fired. I literally called my dad. I was like, dude, like, I swear, I think they're going to fire me. I can't believe I did this. This is a big mistake. And then I called my manager. He's totally chill about it. He's like, yeah, it's fine. Like, just fix it in the next release. Like,
no, that's so funny because at least I worked at Index Exchange early in my career, and I had a similar kind of outage where we run an ad exchange,
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
like the stock exchange, but for ads. And
Right.
I introduced a bug related to billing.
Yeah.
Basically, whenever an ad got shown, and we would bill the, usually we'd bill the advertiser for that.
Yeah.
However, my bug introduced a problem in actually sending bills to advertisers. So basically, for about an hour and a half, we weren't able to bill advertisers for all the adverts that we were showing on the websites. And in that hour, I basically lost like $80,000 for the company within that 1 hour. And I realized, and that was more than my salary at the time, actually. So I realized, like, wow, I kind of just fired myself in a sense, you know, and I got really scared too. But again, the same thing. They said, oh, it's not a problem with you, it's a process problem. You know, other people kind of let that issue, go on. And so the team took responsibility rather than just kind of blaming it on myself, And I think at your scale, where that's impacted even more people and so on, the same thing really applies. But I think, it's cool to be able to do work that has that kind of impact, even though there are risks like that, right?
Yeah. No, it's cool. Especially that's one of the benefits of these big companies. You have potentially big scale impact, but when you're so early in your career, they give you such a small piece of this big thing, and you might control that and you might have ownership over that, but it is just a small piece of a big thing. So you have less impact than you might imagine. And so that's the trade-off of it, I guess.
No, definitely. Everyone, if you're new to the channel, here at Simvo, we explore life's toughest questions through deep reflections, challenges, and beautiful interviews, all so that we can live life a little better and a little brighter. Let's dive into this video. Yeah, so I like that. I like that. I also like what you said about, feeling like you're a cog in the wheel. I guess at Apple being such a big company, those feelings, did you realize that straight away, or when did you kind of feel that you felt that you were just kind of like a small part in this big system?
Well, I kind of knew that from the start, to be honest, but Apple's interesting because it feels like the military almost. Like they have like classification levels for different projects, and they have a very regimented way about going about things. They have strict deadlines they need to meet. So anyways, that's a little bit off topic, but no, I think even from the beginning you start to feel, okay, you are kind of replaceable. Like it's not like you're irreplaceable with what you're doing. It's not that what you're doing is that unique, and so you do feel kind of like a replaceable cog in the wheel. But not everyone feels like that. I think only some people, I think, feel like that, and some people really enjoy that experience. So it's a bit different.
No, I was going to say that seems to kind of fit into your previous mindset that you had going into your career, where you've kind of always wanted to do something for yourself, or you always had your eyes set on meaningful work and whatever your heart's desires or your passions were. So I guess those two kind of combined together while you're Apple after maybe a few years to kind of start realizing that maybe you should start doing some other work and maybe creating a new path for yourself?
Yeah, I think when I was at Apple, especially in like the last 6 months, so Apple has like super restrictive policies around doing any sort of work outside of the company. And so that almost initially, that hurdle was like, oh, I shouldn't do this because I'll get fired or whatever. But I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, if I'm going to get fired, whatever. Like, let me just try to build something on the side or do something to get myself in a better position, that I'm a bit happier with the life I have. And so I just started working on the side, started going like hackathons every weekend, going to different events and trying to like constantly build basically as much as I could. And that was what eventually opened the path for me to be able to leave. So that was kind of the focus for the last 6 months for me, was just keep building stuff, and then eventually an opportunity came up. So
so it wasn't like a gradual, it wasn't like a sudden realization. It's like, oh, I need to leave and I need to create this startup, and you kind of just jumped into it. It was a very kind of gradual process over the course of like 6 months to a year to kind of just start coming up with some kind of business idea, or maybe you didn't even have an idea. You just, like you said, did all these hackathons, and you just kind of started building a project and so on, right? And so at what point did your kind of project and effort start turning into something that could look like a startup?
I mean, now that I understand startups a bit more, I think any of those projects could have been companies. Well, I shouldn't say any. There's a good, like, you can make a business in many different ways.
But
I think so. It's hard to say at what point, really. So yeah, it's hard to say at what point.
Okay.
It's just
Yeah.
they all had potential, and you're just kind of building things, and there wasn't really a plan with building them. And at the time when you said it was gradual, it really felt super uncomfortable for me because being tied in with the visa, like you're Canadian too, so you kind of get this. Is like you're tied to a visa to your employer, and if you don't like what you're doing, you're trapped, and you're like, oh my god, like what am I doing here? Like if I leave, do I lose my life? What you're trying to make this trade-off of like what am I doing?
You feel very restricted in what you can do.
Exactly. So you feel like super restricted, and so I was having like extreme anxiety where I'd wake up some days and I would feel like I can't breathe, and I was just because I was feeling so much like what am I doing here? Like why am I in this position, and why am I stuck in this position? And so it just kept building like that. And so when it was gradual, I wish it would have been more sudden.
To kind of avoid a lot of those wake ups like that, you know. It's so interesting because a lot of people would say like I would kill to be in your position making as much as you did, and still you're waking up kind of feeling like that and so on. So I guess the money at that point wasn't, you know, like you said before, it wasn't even having any real impact on your sense of self and happiness at that point, I'd say.
It's interesting because I was on a date with somebody I don't know that well. It's like a first date or something, and she was telling me a similar story where she wanted to leave her job, and her parents were saying, "You're crazy to leave this job. Everybody would kill to have this job. What are you talking about? You want to leave?" And she was having these kind of, and I was having the same for my own family too.
As part of the golden handcuffs, as they're called.
I guess part of that, but it's also just. I don't know. For them, they don't understand, I guess, or not so much. They don't understand. I think there's a generational difference. So, like, parents might say things differently. But anyways, all that to say is what I realized is the money doesn't really matter. The status at some point wears off, and you're really looking at yourself and am I happy with what I'm doing? Yes or no? And if it's no, and it's going on for too long, it becomes like, oh my God, what is going on with my life? Like it becomes hard to manage, and that's where the anxiety comes from because you're not acting on it, and you're not acting on it, and you feel like you can't act on it. But now, even now, when I look back, it was like, oh, I could have acted on it. I just didn't know any better. And so, anyways.
Eventually, though, you did act on it because you were finally able to make the leap to leave Apple and kind of pursue your business full time, thanks to the help of an incubator too, right?
Yeah.
And I think, do you think it was getting to the point where your company was supported by the incubator to feel that you had enough to stand on to actually leave your job? Was that the kind of main trigger point that gave you the, I guess, courage or the ability to break free from those golden handcuffs and leave a lot of money on the table?
Yeah, I think that the big part of it, you're right, is I probably didn't have the courage to do it if I wasn't able to find funding. I think having funding made the decision a lot easier.
But it's sensible too, I think, to do that instead of just taking a leap without knowing if you have something that, you know, you're onto something, or you know, I think it takes credence to that. You shouldn't always just blindly take leaps like that. You should take educated leaps. You know, you should be smart about how you do things, because you could have made that jump immediately, but maybe you wouldn't have been able to find the, you know, the product market fit, you know, at that time. So
no, you're right, because even say I would have left immediately, the challenge, as you know too, with the visa is like, when you lose your status, you have 60 days left in the US. And so it's like in 60 days, you better cook. Like, you better cook up something good.
And 60 days for a startup is not a lot of time to get somewhere. So, you know, that's so true. So, but you finally did it. You know, you were able to quit Apple and still work legally here under a visa for your startup. And so when you finally got started on that journey, did you finally feel like, oh, finally I'm doing what I want to do? You know, was all that anxiety gone? Were you able to finally, you know, be like, oh yes, you know, wake up and just feel integrated with what you wanted to do?
I definitely felt more at peace that I was on a path that I liked, but I was super anxious because I was worried about the state of the company. So there was a lot of anxiety that I had around that. So the anxiety didn't go away. And it's something that I learned throughout that process, like, oh, I need to get better at controlling my anxiety. And as kind of the company progressed, I got a lot better at learning different techniques and how do you manage anxiety. Anyway, so I'm a totally different person than what I was when I started. But
Yeah.
when I started, those were the primary challenges. It was
Yeah.
anxiety and managing stress and managing relationships that are causing some sort of stress as well. And there's
It's almost as
that.
if, like, you know, you had one source of anxiety being like, oh, I'm still at Apple, I'm still wanting to do something, and then it's like you finally, you know, solve that problem, and then it's like you kind of created new problems, you know, out of your situation, which many of us do, and I do that as well, and that's something to really work on.
Yeah.
Do you think, looking back, you didn't need to feel that way, and you could have, you know, maybe enjoyed that whole process a bit more?
Enjoyed it, maybe not, because it is a very stressful time. But the way that I guess the way that I frame things differently now is everything, like, and this comes from this book that I really like called The Courage to be Disliked. I haven't talked to you about it. Maybe I have. I don't know if I mentioned it.
No, you just told me about, like, you know, wanting to be liked as something that we don't need to necessarily do above what we believe is right for ourselves and you know, for what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the one thing about this book, and this is common phrasing, but I was just listening to it yesterday, but it speaks about how life is just a series of moments, and it's almost like just these series of moments look like a line at a distance, but in actuality, when you look, they're just small dots in time, just in line with each other. And so the reason I say that is, if I were to do it again, what I think would help control the anxiety is not looking so far forward in the future. And if you just look at the moment and keep making the best decisions in the moment, then you'll ideally end up in a good place, right?
Yeah.
And that helps, I think, control anxiety. Helps you control negative thoughts and too much forward looking, and I think it helps control a lot of those issues.
Yeah, like taking things one step at a time. At least for me, I find just being able to remove all these other unknowns and all these other predictions for the long term, those just kind of just cause problem in your mind, because your mind's always trying to, you know, relate everything together and create like a perfect story. But the more variables that you put into there, the more difficult it is to create something cohesive with all those things, right?
Yeah.
So to be able to kind of remove all the things that you probably don't even know, you probably won't even be able to predict, and just kind of look at what you need to do right now. I think that's huge, not only in a startup, but also, like, I learned that in my own job also as a software engineer. Just being able to take things day by day, really not only makes your days more enjoyable, but makes you much more effective in, you know, the things that you do. So, you know, I totally agree with that. And was there anything else you wanted to say about that, or?
No, not particularly.
Okay. Yeah. No. Let's let's move on to the actual kind of startup now. So, I do know after, you know, you finally got started on things, there were certain issues that kind of bubbled up, right, within your startup, and most of them were related to people, right? And so I want to hear more about what were some of the things, maybe not that went wrong, or what were some of the things related to people that kind of you realized, oh, this was much more difficult of a problem than you had anticipated, you know, beyond the other things you think about a startup.
I guess the way I would frame it for myself is it's not so much about other people, it's more about how do you react. Basically, how do you manage yourself is more the issue. I think was not so much the people, it was more so how do you manage yourself and how do you manage what you think other people expect of you. And I think those are the two key pieces that I struggled with, right? It's like, I believed these people had this expectation of me, and because these people have some expectation of me, I'm trying to act in a way that would be different than what I think is the right thing to do. Now, having a little bit more experience with that kind of situation, I would take the path that I think is the best thing to do. But because at the time I didn't really know any better, I was making decisions that was maybe not the best, but it is what it is.
No, I mean, I think that's very similar to like corporate politics, right? You need to have a certain ability to make people like you and get people on your side, no matter what it is, you know, you have to do to kind of get to that point. But maybe in a startup, and especially when you're doing something that you really love, that's integrated for yourself, that's not necessarily something that you should do, because that kind of disaligns you, right, from what you think is right or what you think the company needs, right?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest mistake that I made, I think, and many respects and a long timeline was not doing the things that in my head made sense, and kind of and again, you learn from these mistakes. It's not something it was a good lesson for me in many respects. I learned a lot, and now if I were in the situation again, I would do a lot of things better.
No, especially when it comes to like working with the right people and finding the right people to kind of build something with. I had a similar thing happen where one of my previous kind of startups before I moved to San Francisco, the only reason why it imploded was because of the inter-founder like conflicts, which bubbled up and which weren't addressed. It wasn't even finding product market fit, running out of money or anything like that. It was really a people thing.
Right.
And I think that made me realize how important it is to really be a good person yourself, but also try and look to find the good in other people and find good people to work with and really spend a lot of time assessing if the people you're working with are going to be the right ones.
Right.
Would you say that also applies to just life in general and your just general career beyond a startup?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The one thing I was thinking when you were mentioning this is when you're in a relationship with somebody, and and again, putting the startup to the side, because to the startup, I would say is more I put more on myself, the things that I learned and things I could have done differently, because it's hard to have expectations of others, so it's more expectations for myself. But when I thought about what you were saying just there was, when you're in a relationship with someone, it's almost like not a mirror, but it shows you more of your own personality, and you start to learn more about yourself by being in relationships with people, because everybody, when they're on their own, they think they're pretty sweet, and because you're not in any sort of conflict, you're not any sort of contention. But when that kind of thing comes, is you start to learn about, okay, how does my mind think here? Where does my mind go? Why do I act like this? And I think that those things are important, both the failures and the successes in many respects. You need to have these experiences to know what you need to change and what you need to improve, and how do you effectively align yourself better. And to your point of how do you find a relationship that might better suit you, or whatever it might be, right? So, I think it is really important to go through these kind of things, so you get to see both how you need to improve yourself, but also what other decisions you can make in the future to get better outcomes, right?
Yeah, no, that's so true. I think one big thing I realized was, a great kind of litmus test or way to see how you are with other people, or how you show up to other people, is actually just how you're friends and how you're generally regarded within your friend group, And if you find there's like a disalignment between how you feel like you should be seen, or how you feel like other people kind of see you versus how you see yourself, I think that's a great point of evidence that maybe there's some work that you need to do, or maybe there's some things that you need to figure out to kind of close that gap, so that you are actually acting in alignment with how you want to be, and then how you want other people to see you. Not that you need to care and depend on other people's opinions, but you can use that as a way to gauge how you're showing up with the world, especially to your friends, because they're the ones who see you the most. Right? So were you going to say something?
No, I agree with this. I think there's differing levels of relationships too, and this is getting so far off topic.
No.
But friends, I think, is like the lowest level, meaning there is less contention among friends because you can choose when you engage with them.
Yeah.
Then you have other types of relationships where there's more commitment, say a roommate.
Yeah.
That's probably in the next level up from a friend. And you have some contention there because you don't choose the engagements.
Yeah.
And because you don't choose the engagements, you find each other in states where somebody might not show up in the way that they want to show up, or maybe they're angry, or maybe whatever. There's more meat on that relationship there, and it keeps going, like romantic
coworkers,
exactly,
and then like co-founders, and probably like your romantic relationship or life partner is probably the final level.
Exactly. And so it is. There's levels to it too. I wouldn't over-index on friends too much, but
No, exactly. Of course, your loved ones and too should be all part of what you use to kind of gauge.
Right.
And I think going forward, that's such a huge thing. I think a lot of us learn as we get older is your relationships are super important, and how you show up to people people really can determine how you end up seeing yourself at the end of the day. And so I think, going forward now, as you move on with like your career and stuff, like what are any kind of final perspectives that you try to take on now, in your day-to-day?
Well, what I distill that down in my head to is, well, what are the biggest learnings that you have that you're trying to implement?
Yeah.
And the way that I think about it right now for myself is I think to what I was saying earlier when I was saying I had a lot of anxiety. Part of what the anxiety came from was an unwillingness to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Or being scared almost to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And what that puts you in a position is you're scared to make a decision.
Yeah.
Because you're scared that any path you take potentially has a bad outcome. And when you're in that state, it becomes really hard to operate. And so the thing that I've been trying to do more so for myself now is just be able to forgive myself if there is a mistake, make the decision, see the outcome, and then based on the outcome, readjust. So if you make a mistake, correct it quickly.
Yeah.
And then that should be enough, right?
Yeah.
And that opens your mind up.
You shouldn't be mad at yourself for making that mistake.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have played sports together. Like, what will happen to me a lot of times is, like, if I make a bad pass, in my head, I'm swearing to myself, like, oh man, this idiot, what are you doing? You're making this pass. And I'm swearing to myself because I don't want to make a mistake, and I'm setting this expectation high.
Yeah.
But the realistic thing is, okay, you made the mistake, correct it, win the ball back, do what you need to do to correct it, but then also train to make sure you don't do this again.
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably a better way to be, and I think it keeps your mind calmer.
Yeah,
and so that's just what I've been trying
to do.
I
I totally agree. On the note on soccer, playing sports, especially the higher level you get, you kind of get to the point where, say when you get the ball, you have to control it, move it somewhere, and then pass it as fast as humanly possible. And in those situations, there's no room for you to think extra amounts of time. You need to put all your mental energy into executing that action. And if you have in your minds like, oh, is this going to be the right thing? Is this going to lead to a mistake? That is going to mess up your ability to execute and concentrate on what you need to do. And so, I think those who operate at the highest level are very much able to avoid all that and really just let their instincts kind of kick in and choose how to execute, whatever they need to do. And I think that applies to any decision you make, throughout your day, as well as, just your human relationships, maybe even dating, and just being, a person who's comfortable to be around. And so I totally agree with that. And, I think on that note, that's, we've learned a lot here talking to you. It's been really great, Ali. I think one last thing I want to say is, through this whole journey of yours, rising to the top, figuring out what you want to do and putting in or making the brave decision to kind of put yourself in a more vulnerable position with your startup. Do you have any regrets in anything you've done,
No, I think all of these, the only reason, I'm sorry, I was just trying to think. I don't have any regrets, because the only thing I would say to you might be a regret was something that I made a mistake on doing in the past. But when I look back on these decisions, like, I made the best decision with the tools that I had at the time. And if I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't have developed a new tool set to deal with that situation better. So it becomes almost like, obviously I would have made a better decision in the past, but I didn't have the skill set then. Like, I literally, when I reflect, I'm like, oh, I didn't know I could make that option. I didn't know I had this path, or I didn't know I could act like this. And so it becomes hard to regret something like that, because you're like, okay, you've almost come to peace with, hey, I did what I could.
Yeah, of course. With every mistake and with every new thing that you do, you learn something and you become better for it.
Exactly.
And that's really all we're trying to learn in this channel, isn't it? So I think that's it. But thanks so much, Ali. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I think the viewers would really like that. So if you guys really enjoyed this discussion, for sure stay tuned for more great, beautiful interviews. This is the first of many, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
And subscribe.
Yeah, and subscribe too, yes, please. Thanks for joining me today on Simvo. I hope today's conversation inspired you to think differently or gave you a new perspective on life. If it did, definitely let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more interviews, challenges, and deep reflections, all so that we can learn to be better people every day.